Glass shattered somewhere below, and Alina Whitfield stopped breathing for a second before she forced her legs to move. The sound rolled up through the mansion like thunder trapped inside a stone hallway, and she knew without seeing it that the front doors were gone. Boots pounded across marble. Voices shouted orders in short, hard bursts. She had exactly one thought left in her mind, and it pushed her toward the far end of the study, toward a bookshelf that did not belong there, toward a door only 3 people in the world were supposed to know about. She pressed her palm against the carved wooden panel on the 3rd shelf, just as she had been shown years ago, in a life she had tried to forget. The panel gave way with a soft click, and the false back of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a narrow space barely wide enough for one person to stand. She stepped inside and pulled the shelf closed behind her, her heart slamming so hard she was sure it could be heard through the wood. Darkness wrapped around her. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the hidden space and listened. Footsteps entered the study. Furniture scraped. A lamp fell and broke. Then, after a moment that felt endless, everything went quiet. Too quiet. The panel moved. Light spilled into the narrow space, and a tall figure stood in the opening, his silhouette filling the frame completely. Alina did not need to see his face to know who it was. She had seen photographs. She had heard the name spoken in careful whispers her whole life, the way people speak about storms and diseases and things that cannot be stopped once they begin. Vittorio Conti. He studied her without expression, his dark eyes moving from her face to her hands to the way she stood, perfectly still, refusing to shake even though every part of her wanted to. Behind him, she could hear other men waiting, their weapons lowered but ready, watching their boss for a signal. "Who told you to hide here?" Vittorio asked. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse than shouting would have been. Alina lifted her chin. She had promised herself years ago that if this moment ever came, she would not cower. "Nobody told me," she said. "I already knew." Something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of surprise he clearly was not used to feeling. Very few people in this house knew about the space behind the 3rd shelf. It had been built long before he was born, hidden from architects and inspectors, and even most of his own family. Only blood was supposed to know. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "It is," Alina answered, "because my father built it." The room seemed to hold its breath. One of the men behind Vittorio shifted his weight, and a low murmur passed between them, quickly silenced by a single look from their boss. Vittorio stepped closer, close enough that Alina could see the fine details of his face, the small scar near his jaw, the tightness around his mouth that suggested he was working very hard to remain calm. "Your father," he repeated. "Marcus Whitfield," Alina said. "He worked for your family for 11 years. He designed half the hidden rooms in this house, including the one you are standing in front of right now." Vittorio's jaw tightened. He turned his head slightly, speaking without looking away from her. "Everyone out, now." The men hesitated only a moment before filing out of the study, closing the heavy doors behind them. When they were alone, Vittorio extended a hand toward Alina, not to grab her, but to help her step out of the narrow space. She hesitated before taking it, and the moment her feet touched the study floor again, she felt the full weight of what she had just admitted settle over her. "Sit," Vittorio said, gesturing toward a leather chair near the cold fireplace. It was not a request. Alina sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. Vittorio remained standing, studying her the way a man studies a puzzle he suspects has been placed in front of him on purpose. "I do not remember a man named Marcus Whitfield," he said. "You wouldn't, you were young when he worked here, maybe 8, maybe 9 years old." Alina kept her voice steady, though the memories pulling at her were anything but calm. "He left when I was 6. One day he came home and told my mother we were moving. He never explained why. 2 weeks later he was gone completely. No note, No phone call, nothing. Gone, Vittorio repeated. You mean he disappeared? I mean he was gone, Alina said carefully, and nobody in this family has ever explained where. Vittorio's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted, a tension that had nothing to do with the raid outside. He walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the grounds where his men were now securing the perimeter, dragging away the last traces of whatever attack had just been stopped. You came here tonight, during an attack on my house, to ask me about a man who worked here more than 20 years ago, he said, not quite a question. I did not know there would be an attack, Alina said. I came here because I finally found the courage to ask. I have been trying to reach someone in this family for years. Letters were never answered. Phone calls were never returned. I thought if I came in person, someone would finally have to look at me and tell me the truth. And instead, you found yourself hiding from gunfire in a wall my father built. Your father did not build that wall, Alina said. Mine did. I told you that already. Vittorio turned back to face her, and for the first time since he had opened the panel, something like genuine curiosity crossed his features. You are very confident for a woman sitting in the middle of a house that was just attacked, surrounded by men who would have shot first and asked questions never, if I had not stopped them. I have spent 20 years being afraid of this family, Alina said, her voice finally cracking with the emotion she had been holding back. I am done being afraid. If you are going to hurt me, you might as well do it after you answer my question. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the sounds of the raid's aftermath continued, distant shouting, the low rumble of vehicles pulling away, someone barking instructions about the front gate. Inside the study, the silence between them stretched thin and sharp. Finally, Vittorio walked to a cabinet near the fireplace and poured 2 glasses of water, setting one on the small table beside Alina's chair. It was such an ordinary gesture that it caught her off guard. I was young when your father worked here, he said, sitting across from her now, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. I remember pieces. A man who came late at night sometimes, carried tools in a leather bag, spoke quietly with my father in rooms the rest of us were not allowed to enter. That sounds like him, Alina said softly. I remember my father trusted him, Vittorio continued, which was rare. My father did not trust easily. Then maybe you can understand why I need to know what happened to him. Vittorio's gaze grew distant, as if he were sifting through memories buried under years of other, louder events. There were rumors when I was older about a man who knew too much and left in the middle of the night. I never had a name to put to the story. Nobody spoke of it directly. In this family, some subjects are simply never discussed. Someone has to remember something real, Alina pressed. A name, a place, anything. My cousin Nadia might know more, Vittorio said slowly. She was closer to my father in his final years. She managed household records, family matters, things I was kept away from at the time. Alina's pulse quickened at the mention of a name that might lead somewhere real after 2 decades of silence. Would she talk to me? That depends, Vittorio said, on whether I decide you are telling the truth. I am. Everyone says that. The doors to the study opened before Alina could respond, and a younger man stepped inside, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. He was tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a dark jacket that still carried the faint smell of gun smoke. His eyes landed on Alina immediately, narrowing with suspicion. Who is this? He demanded, looking between Alina and his brother. Dante, Vittorio said evenly. This does not concern you. Everything in this house concerns me tonight, Dante snapped. We just lost 2 men at the gate. The Bellini family sent people through our own front door, and you are sitting here having a conversation with a stranger you pulled out of a wall. She is not a stranger, Vittorio said. Her father worked for our family, Marcus Whitfield. Something flickered across Dante's face, gone so quickly Alina almost missed it. It was there and then buried, replaced by irritation. I have never heard that name. You were barely walking when he was here, Vittorio said. It does not surprise me. Dante's eyes returned to Alina, studying her with open distrust. Convenient timing, showing up the same night the Bellinis try to walk through our front door. I did not know there would be an attack, Alina said again, feeling the need to defend herself building in her chest. I have been trying to reach this family for years. So you say, Dante's voice was cold. People say a lot of things when they are caught somewhere they should not be. Enough, Vittorio said, his tone carrying a quiet authority that made even his brother fall silent. She stays here tonight, under guard, until we understand what happened downstairs and what her presence has to do with it, if anything. Dante did not look satisfied, but he did not argue further. He gave Alina one last measured look before turning and leaving the study, the doors closing hard behind him. Alina let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. He does not trust me. My brother does not trust anyone, Vittorio said. It has kept him alive this long. And you, do you trust me? Vittorio considered the question longer than she expected. I do not know yet what to believe about you, he said finally. But I know this. Nobody outside 3 families has ever known about that space in the wall. You knew exactly where to find it, exactly how to open it in the middle of an attack without hesitation. Either your father truly built it, or someone inside this house told you far more than they should have. It was my father, Alina said firmly. He drew the plans on the back of an old grocery receipt when I was small. I found it years later, after he vanished, hidden inside a book he left behind. I memorized every line of that drawing because it was the only piece of him I had left. Something in her voice must have carried enough weight because Vittorio's expression softened just slightly, the hard edges of suspicion giving way to something closer to consideration. Show me, he said. This drawing. Do you still have it? I have a copy, Alina said. Not here at home. Then tomorrow, Vittorio said, you will show me, and I will decide what happens next. Alina nodded slowly, aware that her answer had bought her time but nothing more. She still did not know if she was a guest in this house or a prisoner, and judging by the guards now posted outside the study doors, she suspected the truth was somewhere painfully close to the second option. Vittorio walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at her one final time. For what it is worth, he said, your father was well liked in this house by those who remember him. Whatever happened to him, I intend to find out the truth as much as you do. He left without another word, and Alina sat alone in the quiet study, surrounded by the faint smell of smoke drifting in from the broken front doors below, wondering if she had just found an ally inside the very family that had taken her father from her, or if she had simply walked into a trap far more dangerous than the one she had escaped in the wall. Outside the window, the last of the vehicles rolled away into the darkness, and the house settled into an uneasy silence, the kind that comes right before a storm decides whether to break or pass. A soft knock came at the study door sometime after midnight. Alina straightened in her chair, unsure whether to answer, but the door opened before she needed to decide. A woman stepped inside, carrying a folded blanket and a small tray with tea. She was older than Alina, with sharp eyes and silver threaded through dark hair pulled back in a tight knot. Vittorio asked me to bring you something warm, the woman said, setting the tray on the small table. My name is Nadia. Alina's breath caught. Nadia, he mentioned you earlier. He said you might remember my father. Nadia's expression grew still, careful in a way that told Alina she had chosen her next words long before speaking them. Marcus Whitfield, she said quietly. I wondered if anyone would ever say that name in this house again. You remember him? I remember him well. Nadia sat on the edge of a nearby chair, folding her hands in her lap. He used to bring me small carved animals when I was a girl, pieces of scrap wood shaped into birds and foxes. He said a house should have more than locks and walls inside it. He said it should have a little bit of kindness too. Tears rose in Alina's eyes before she could stop them. It had been so long since anyone had spoken about her father as a real person, rather than an absence, a question mark, a wound that never fully closed. Do you know what happened to him? Why he left? Nadia's gaze dropped briefly to her hands. I know pieces, not the whole truth. There were arguments near the end between your father and men who are no longer part of this family. Serious arguments, the kind that happened behind closed doors and were never explained to the rest of us. Arguments about what? I do not know for certain, Nadia said. I was young myself, and household staff were kept far from matters like that. But I remember the night he left. I remember because it was the same night old Salvatore Conti, Vittorio's father, locked himself in this very study for hours and would not speak to anyone, not even his own wife. Alina leaned forward, hope and dread tangled together in her chest. Is there anyone who might actually know the full story? Records, letters, anything? There were old ledgers once, Nadia said slowly. Household accounts, visitor logs, things Salvatore kept locked away long after he stopped needing them for any practical purpose. Whether they still exist, I cannot say. This house has had many changes since those years. Rooms sealed, files moved. Some things, I suspect, were destroyed on purpose. The weight of that possibility settled heavily over Alina. 20 years of searching, and the answer might have already been burned or buried, erased by hands that wanted the truth to stay hidden forever. Do not lose hope yet, Nadia said, seeming to read the change in her expression. This family keeps more secrets than it destroys. If those ledgers exist, I know where old records used to be stored. Tomorrow, if Vittorio allows it, I can help you look. Why would you help me? Alina asked. You do not know me. I could be lying about everything. Nadia studied her for a long moment, the same careful, measuring look Vittorio had given her earlier. Because I remember a good man who was kind to a lonely girl in a house full of hard men, she said. And because his daughter walked into gunfire tonight and hid in a wall he built with his own hands, rather than turn away and forget him like everyone else did. That tells me something about who you are. The words settled over Alina like a small, fragile comfort in the middle of an impossible night. She thanked Nadia quietly, and the older woman rose, pausing at the door before she left. Rest if you can, Nadia said. Tomorrow will ask more of you than tonight did. Left alone again, Alina wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and sat by the cold fireplace, staring at the dying embers as though they might rearrange themselves into answers. Somewhere beyond the study doors, she could hear the low murmur of guards changing positions, the occasional creak of old floorboards settling under careful footsteps, the enormous, watchful quiet of a house built to keep secrets far better than it kept people safe. She thought of her mother, waiting at home, who had begged her not to come here, who had spent 20 years refusing to speak her husband's name out loud because the silence hurt less than the questions. She thought of the drawing folded inside an old book on her nightstand, the only proof she had that her father's hands had shaped part of this house long before it became a place of raids and hidden rooms and men who decided, with a single word, who lived and who did not. Alina did not sleep that night. She sat in the chair by the cold fireplace, replaying every word Vittorio Conti had spoken, searching for the lie hidden somewhere inside his careful calm, and finding, to her growing unease, that she could not locate one. Whatever answers waited for her inside this house, she understood now that finding them would cost her something. She only hoped it would not cost her everything her father had already lost. Morning light cut through the tall windows of the study, but Alina had not moved from the chair by the fireplace in hours. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, and her body ached from sitting rigid through the long night, listening to every footstep outside the door, waiting for someone to decide her fate. When the doors finally opened, it was not Vittorio who entered first, but Dante, his expression sharp and unreadable. "Get up," he said. "My brother wants you in the East Hall now." Alina rose slowly, her legs stiff, and followed him through corridors she had never walked before, past portraits of stern-faced men and women whose eyes seemed to track her every step. The East Hall turned out to be a long room lined with old filing cabinets and a heavy wooden table, where Vittorio and Nadia already stood waiting, several thick ledgers spread open in front of them. "You found something," Alina said, unable to keep the hope from her voice. "Perhaps," Vittorio said. "Sit." She sat across from him, and Nadia slid one of the ledgers toward her, pointing to a faded line of handwriting near the bottom of a page. "This is a visitor log from 22 years ago," Nadia explained. "Your father's name appears here along with dates. Look at this final entry." Alina leaned forward, scanning the careful, old-fashioned handwriting. "Marcus Whitfield, meeting requested with SC, private, urgent." The date matched almost exactly with the timeline her mother had always given her, the last weeks before he disappeared entirely. "SC," Alina said, "Salvatore Conti." "My father," Vittorio confirmed. "There is no record of what was discussed, only that the meeting happened late at night and that it was marked urgent by your father himself, not by mine." "Something was wrong," Alina said quietly. "He knew something was wrong and he tried to warn your father about it." "Or he was involved in something that went wrong," Dante interjected from where he stood near the door, arms crossed. "You are assuming he was innocent in whatever happened. We do not know that." "My father was not a criminal," Alina said sharply, turning to face him. "He built furniture. He designed hidden rooms because your family paid him to, not because he wanted any part of the rest of it." "Everyone who worked in this house became part of the rest of it eventually," Dante said, "whether they wanted to or not." The tension between them stretched thin until Vittorio raised a hand, silencing his brother without a word. He turned back to Alina, his expression unreadable. "There is more," he said. "Nadia found something else." Nadia pulled a second, smaller book from beneath the ledger, its leather cover cracked with age. "A personal journal," she said. "It belonged to my aunt, who managed this household long before I did. She wrote about small things mostly, meals, guests, weather. But there is an entry from the same week." She opened the journal to a marked page and read aloud, her voice careful. "The carpenter came again tonight, later than usual, and left looking as though he had seen something terrible. Salvatore has not slept in 2 days. Something is very wrong in this house, and nobody will tell me what." Alina felt her chest tighten. "The carpenter, that has to be my father." "It fits the timeline," Vittorio agreed. "But it tells us only that something frightened him, not what." "Maybe he saw something he was not supposed to see," Alina suggested. "Maybe that is why he tried to warn your father, and maybe that is why he disappeared so suddenly afterward." "Or maybe," Dante said coldly, "he saw an opportunity and decided to sell information to someone outside this family. Men have vanished from this house before for exactly that reason." Alina stood so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "My father did not betray anyone. He loved this house. He loved his work here, even after everything. Why would he keep the drawing of that hidden room for 20 years if he had betrayed the people who trusted him with it?" "Sentiment," Dante said with a shrug. "Or evidence, kept in case he ever needed leverage." "Enough," Vittorio said again, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had ended the argument the night before. "We do not know enough yet to decide anything. Accusing a man who cannot defend himself based on guesses helps no one." Dante's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further, though his eyes remained fixed on Alina with open suspicion. Nadia closed the journal gently. "There is one more name I found, written in the margin of a later entry, A man named Felix Grady. He worked as a driver for this family during those years. If anyone besides Salvatore knew what frightened your father, it might have been him. Is he still alive? Alina asked. I do not know, Nadia admitted. He left this family's service not long after your father disappeared. I have not heard his name spoken since. Vittorio turned to one of the men waiting near the door, giving quiet instructions to locate any information available on Felix Grady, his current location, whether he was even still living. The man nodded and left immediately, and for a moment the room settled into a heavy, waiting silence. You believe me, Alina said quietly to Vittorio, studying his face. Somewhere along the way tonight you decided you believe me. I believe the evidence in front of me, Vittorio said carefully. It does not yet prove your father was innocent. But it does prove he was afraid of something real, something connected to this house, and that my own father spent his final years refusing to speak of it. That is enough to keep looking. Alina nodded slowly, grateful for even that much. She turned to Nadia. Thank you for remembering him, for helping me find this much. Do not thank me yet, Nadia said gently. We have found questions, not answers. The hardest part may still be ahead. The morning stretched into afternoon as they continued searching through old records, cross-referencing names and dates, building a fragile timeline out of scraps of handwriting and half-remembered stories. Alina learned that her father had worked closely with several men who no longer appeared anywhere in the family's current circle, men who had either left, retired, or in 2 cases, died under circumstances the ledgers described only vaguely as unfortunate accidents. Late in the day, the man Vittorio had sent to search for information on Felix Grady returned, his expression grim. He leaned close to Vittorio and spoke quietly, though Alina caught enough of the conversation to understand the shape of what he was saying. Felix Grady was alive. He lived several hours away, in a small town along the coast, having changed his last name and cut all contact with anyone connected to his old life. He is hiding, Alina said, once the man had stepped away. Just like I have been hiding my whole life from the questions nobody would answer. If he changed his name and disappeared, Vittorio said, he did it because he was afraid of something or someone. Finding him will not be simple, and convincing him to speak may be even harder. I have to try, Alina said. I have spent 20 years not knowing. I am not stopping now, not when I am this close. Dante, who had remained silent for the last hour, finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before, though no less sharp. And if what he tells you is not what you want to hear, if your father was not the innocent man you have spent your whole life believing him to be. Alina met his gaze steadily. Then at least I will finally know the truth, instead of carrying a question that has followed me my entire life. Something in her answer seemed to shift the air between them, even Dante's hard expression softening by the smallest fraction. He said nothing more, but he did not argue further either, and Alina took that small silence as the closest thing to respect she was likely to receive from him. As evening approached, Vittorio made a decision. Tomorrow, we go to find this man, he said. Nadia will remain here to continue searching the remaining records. Dante will come with us in case there is trouble. Trouble? Alina repeated. You think Felix Grady might be dangerous? I think a man who changes his name and vanishes has usually done so for a reason, Vittorio said. Whether that reason involves danger to us I cannot say yet. We will be careful. Before the household settled for the night, a car arrived at the gate that had not been expected. Alina watched from a window near the east hall as a sleek black vehicle rolled slowly up the long driveway, stopping well short of the entrance, as though whoever sat inside wanted to be seen before approaching any closer. A man stepped out, tall and lean, dressed in a gray coat that looked out of place against the darkening sky. Guards moved toward him immediately, weapons visible but not raised. Who is that? Alina asked, though something in her stomach already recognized the shape of trouble. Vittorio appeared beside her at the window, his jaw tightening the moment he saw the visitor. "Marco Bellini," he said quietly, "of the family that attacked this house 2 nights ago. He comes here after that alone." "That is either very brave or very foolish," Vittorio said. "With Marco, it is usually both." Dante joined them, already reaching for the weapon at his side. "I will handle this." "No," Vittorio said firmly. "If he wanted a fight, he would not have come alone and unarmed. Let him speak first." They went down together, Alina trailing behind at Vittorio's insistence that she remain close but silent. Marco Bellini stood just inside the entrance, his hands visible, his expression carefully neutral despite the number of armed men surrounding him. "Vittorio," Marco said, inclining his head slightly, "I did not come to finish what my cousin started at your gate." "Your cousin is dead," Vittorio said flatly. "Along with 2 of my men, you have some nerve walking through that door." "I came because of her," Marco said, and his eyes shifted directly to Alina, sending a cold jolt through her chest. "Alina Whitfield, I did not expect to find you here, though perhaps I should have guessed." "You know me?" Alina asked, startled. "I know your father's name," Marco said. "It has come up more than once in conversations my family has had over the years, conversations about old debts and older secrets." Vittorio stepped slightly in front of Alina, his voice hard. "Say what you came to say, Marco, or leave." Marco's gaze lingered on Alina a moment longer, before shifting back to Vittorio. "My family did not attack your house 2 nights ago over territory or money, as you have likely assumed. We came because we believed something was hidden here, something that has been searched for a very long time. When I heard a woman had been found hiding inside a wall during the raid, and that her name was Whitfield, I understood immediately what my cousin had actually stumbled into." "What is it you think is hidden here?" Vittorio demanded. "Answers," Marco said simply. "About a night more than 20 years ago, when a man who worked for your family disappeared, and a man who worked for mine disappeared along with him." The words landed like a physical blow. Alina's breath caught in her throat. "Someone from your family disappeared too." "The same night as my father." "My uncle," Marco said. "A man named Felix Grady, before he changed his name and vanished from every record either family kept. My father spent years believing the Contis were responsible, that both men had been silenced for what they knew." "Felix Grady worked for your family," Alina said slowly, the pieces rearranging themselves in her mind. "Not just as a driver here, he was connected to the Bellinis." "He was my father's half-brother," Marco said, "which makes whatever truth he is hiding a family matter for both of us, not just yours." Vittorio's expression had grown very still, the careful calm of a man recalculating every assumption he had built over the last day. "You are saying our families have both been searching for the same man, for the same reasons, without ever realizing it." "It appears that way," Marco said. "Which is why I came here tonight, unarmed, against the advice of everyone in my own family. I believe it is time our families stopped attacking each other over a truth neither of us actually controls, and started searching for it together." Dante let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You expect us to trust you, after what happened at our gate?" "I expect nothing," Marco said evenly. "I am simply telling you what I know, and offering what help I can, because I believe we both want the same answer, even if we have spent years assuming the other family was the enemy standing in our way." Alina looked between the 3 men, her mind racing. If Marco was telling the truth, then the disappearance of her father was tangled together with a second family's grief, a second set of unanswered questions stretching back over the same 20 years. It meant the truth, whatever it turned out to be, was larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "I want to hear everything you know," Alina said, stepping forward despite Vittorio's earlier instruction to remain silent. Everything about Felix Grady, and why your family believed the Contis were responsible. Marco studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering across his features. Then perhaps, he said, our two families finally have a reason to sit down together, instead of raiding each other's gates in the dark. Vittorio did not answer immediately, weighing the offer with visible caution. Finally, he gave a single measured nod. Tomorrow, here, you come with no more than 2 men and you leave your weapons at the gate. Agreed, Marco said. He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at Alina one final time. Your father was well spoken of, Miss Whitfield, by those in my family who still remember those years. Whatever happened to him, I do not believe he deserved it. He walked back out into the darkness, and Alina watched his car disappear down the long driveway, her heart pounding with the sudden, dizzying possibility that the truth she had searched for her entire life might finally be within reach, tangled up with a second family's pain, a second set of secrets waiting to be untangled alongside her own. That night, Alina was given a proper room for the first time since arriving, though 2 guards remained stationed outside her door, a quiet reminder that her position within this house, however improved, was still far from settled. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, turning over every piece of information they had uncovered, searching for a shape that made sense. Her father had been afraid. He had gone to Salvatore Conti with an urgent warning, and then, within weeks, he had vanished from her life entirely, leaving behind only a drawing on the back of a grocery receipt and 2 decades of unanswered questions. Whatever Felix Grady knew, Alina understood that finding him might finally give her the truth she had spent her whole life searching for. She only hoped, lying there in the darkness of a house that had already taken so much from her family, that the truth would be one she could actually survive hearing. Somewhere past midnight, a soft knock came at her door again, quieter this time. Nadia slipped inside, closing the door gently behind her, her expression tense in a way Alina had not seen before. You should know something, Nadia whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. Before Marco Bellini arrived tonight, I found one more entry in my aunt's journal. I did not mention it downstairs. Alina sat up quickly. What did it say? That the night your father left, my aunt heard raised voices from this very room, and one voice she did not recognize, a voice she described as belonging to someone from outside this family entirely. Nadia's hands twisted together in her lap. She wrote that she believed someone came here that night specifically to meet your father, and that whatever was discussed frightened Salvatore Conti enough that he never spoke of it again. Someone came here to meet him, Alina repeated slowly. Do you think it could have been Felix Grady? Perhaps, Nadia said. Or perhaps someone else entirely, someone neither the Contis nor the Bellinis have ever considered. I wanted you to know before tomorrow's meeting, because I do not think Marco Bellini has the whole truth either, no matter how honest he seemed tonight. Alina absorbed this new fragment of information, feeling the shape of the mystery shift once again, growing larger and more uncertain with every answer they uncovered. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. I think I am beginning to understand that nobody in this story has the whole truth. Not yet. No, Nadia agreed, rising from the bed. But between 2 families now searching together instead of apart, we may finally be close enough to find it. She left as quietly as she had entered, and Alina lay back against the pillows, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, aware that tomorrow would bring her one step closer to an answer that had waited 20 years to be spoken aloud, and equally aware that some answers, once found, could never be put back into the silence they came from. The meeting room had been swept for weapons twice before Marco Bellini arrived, and still Dante paced along the far wall, unable to sit still. Alina sat between Vittorio and Nadia, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the door as the morning light shifted slowly across the polished table. Marco entered with only 2 men beside him, exactly as promised, and took his seat across from Vittorio without hesitation. For a long moment, neither man spoke, the weight of decades of rivalry pressing down on the room until Elena felt she might suffocate under it. "Let us begin," Vittorio said finally, "with what each of us actually knows, instead of what we have assumed for 20 years. Marco nodded and reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases from years of handling. "This belonged to my father," he said, sliding it across the table. "A letter, never sent, addressed to Salvatore Conti." Elena leaned forward, as Vittorio unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was hurried, urgent, the ink smudged in places as though written in a rush. She read over Vittorio's shoulder, her chest tightening with every line. "Salvatore," the letter began, "I know what Whitfield told you. My brother came to me the same night, frightened out of his mind, saying he had seen something in the lower archive that should never have existed. He would not tell me what, only that it involved both our families and a debt neither of us knew we owed. If something happens to him, or to Whitfield, know that I will not let it rest quietly." "The lower archive," Elena repeated. "What is that?" "A record room," Vittorio said slowly, "beneath the west wing of this house. It was sealed decades ago, before I was born. I always assumed it held nothing more than old business documents." "Your father sealed it," Nadia said quietly. "I remember now. It was around that same time. He told the household staff the room had structural damage and was no longer safe to enter." "A convenient excuse," Dante said from where he stood, his earlier hostility now tempered by genuine unease. "If Felix Grady saw something down there," Marco said, "something that frightened him enough to write to my father in a panic, then whatever truth we are searching for is not just about 2 missing men. It is about whatever was hidden in that archive." Vittorio rose from the table, his expression hardening into decision. "Then we go down there." Now, the lower archive was reached through a narrow staircase behind the wine cellar, a passage so rarely used that dust lay thick across every step. Vittorio led the way with a lantern, Elena close behind him, followed by Nadia, Dante, and Marco, with his 2 men trailing cautiously at the rear. The door at the bottom had been sealed with a heavy iron bar, rusted from decades of neglect. It took both Dante and one of Marco's men working together to finally force it open, the metal groaning in protest before giving way with a sound like a long-held breath finally released. Inside, the archive was smaller than Elena had expected, rows of shelving lined with boxes and ledgers, all coated in a thick layer of undisturbed dust. Cobwebs stretched between the shelves like pale curtains, and the air smelled of old paper and damp stone. "Structural damage," Marco said dryly, glancing around at the clearly stable room. "It seems your father simply did not want anyone finding what was kept down here." They spread out slowly, searching through boxes with careful hands, unwilling to disturb anything too quickly. Elena found herself drawn toward a shelf near the back, where a single wooden box sat apart from the others, its surface carved with a pattern she recognized instantly. Her breath caught. "This is my father's work," she said, running her fingers over the carved design. "I would know his craftsmanship anywhere. He carved patterns like this into everything he built." She lifted the lid carefully, revealing a bundle of papers tied with fraying string, along with a small leather-bound notebook. Vittorio moved closer, holding the lantern higher as Elena untied the string with trembling hands. The papers were blueprints, dozens of them, detailed drawings of hidden rooms and passages throughout the estate, far more extensive than the single space Elena had known about her whole life. But it was the notebook that made her stomach drop, her father's familiar handwriting filling page after page in careful, cramped script. "It is his journal," she whispered. Vittorio called for everyone to gather closer, and by the light of the lantern, Elena began to read aloud. her voice shaking as the words unfolded a story she had spent 20 years desperate to hear. Her father had written about his work for the Conti family with genuine affection at first, describing the satisfaction of his craft, the trust Salvatore had placed in him. But the entries grew darker as they progressed, describing a night he had come down to this very archive to retrieve old blueprints, only to discover records that did not belong to the Conti family's legitimate business dealings at all. "I found documents tonight that should not exist," her father had written. Proof of arrangements between Salvatore and men outside both our known circles, involving something far larger and more dangerous than territory or money. I do not fully understand what I have found, only that it frightens me deeply, and that I believe both the Contis and the Bellinis have been deceived by someone they trusted completely. "Deceived by whom?" Dante demanded, leaning over Alina's shoulder to read the page himself. Alina turned to the next page, but the writing stopped abruptly, the remainder of the notebook left blank. "This is where it ends," she said, her voice hollow with disappointment. "He never finished explaining." "Because something happened before he could," Marco said grimly. "The same night, most likely, that he and my uncle both vanished." Vittorio took the notebook carefully, flipping through the blank pages as though searching for some hidden clue among the emptiness. "There has to be more," he said. "A man does not simply stop writing mid-thought unless something interrupted him." Nadia, who had been searching a nearby shelf, suddenly called out, holding up a small metal box she had found tucked behind a stack of old ledgers. "This was hidden," she said, "deliberately placed out of sight." Inside the box was a single photograph, faded with age, showing 3 men standing together outside the estate's front gate. Alina recognized her father immediately, younger than she remembered him, standing beside a man she did not know, and beside Salvatore Conti himself, his expression unusually grim for what appeared to be an ordinary photograph. "Who is the third man?" Alina asked, pointing to the stranger standing between her father and Salvatore. Marco leaned in close, studying the faded image, and his face went pale. "I know that man," he said quietly. "That is Antonio Reyes." "Who is Antonio Reyes?" Vittorio asked. "A man my father warned me about my entire life," Marco said. "A man who worked as an intermediary between families for years, arranging deals nobody wanted their names directly attached to. My father always believed Reyes was responsible for far more damage than anyone in either of our families ever understood." "Is he still alive?" Alina asked. "I do not know," Marco admitted. "He disappeared from every circle both our families operate in decades ago. I always assumed he had simply grown old and faded into irrelevance." "Or he vanished the same way my father and your uncle did," Alina said slowly, "because he was the one thing tying them all together." The room fell into a heavy silence as the implications settled over everyone present. Whatever her father had discovered in this archive, whatever secret had frightened both Felix Grady and Marcus Whitfield enough to seek out warnings for the men they worked for, it seemed to trace back to a single figure standing quietly between 2 family patriarchs in a photograph nobody was ever meant to find again. "We need to find out if Reyes is still alive," Vittorio said. "And if he is, we need to find him before anyone else realizes what we have uncovered down here tonight." "You think someone else might already know we are looking," Dante said. "I think," Vittorio said carefully, "that whoever sealed this room and hid these documents did so because they wanted this exact truth to stay buried forever. If they learn it has been found, they will not simply let that happen quietly." Alina clutched her father's notebook tightly against her chest, feeling the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down alongside the fragile hope that she was finally, truly close to understanding what had happened to him. But beneath that hope ran a colder current of fear, the growing realization that the truth they were chasing might be far more dangerous and far more carefully protected than any of them had first believed. As they climbed back up the narrow staircase into the main house, carrying the box of blueprints and the notebook and the faded photograph, Alina could not shake the feeling that somewhere in this house, or perhaps somewhere far beyond it, someone already knew exactly what had just been found in that sealed archive, and was already deciding what to do about it. They gathered again in the East Hall, the box of documents spread carefully across the table as everyone worked to piece together a plan. Marco's men stood near the doorway, watchful but silent, while Marco himself studied the photograph one final time before setting it down. "I can reach out to contacts my father once used," Marco said. "People who might know whether Reyes is alive, and if so, where he has been hiding all these years." "Quietly," Vittorio said. "If word spreads that both our families are searching for him, whoever wants this truth buried will know exactly what we have found." "I am not careless," Marco said, a trace of sharpness returning to his voice. "I have kept my own family's secrets intact for years. I know how to ask questions without announcing the answer to everyone listening." Dante, who had remained quiet since the discovery in the archive, finally spoke, his voice low and troubled. "There is something else we need to consider. Whoever sealed that room, whoever hid these documents so carefully, had to be someone with access to this house. Someone trusted enough to move through it freely, decades ago and possibly still now." The words settled uneasily over the room. Alina watched Vittorio's expression tighten as the implication became clear. "You think someone still living in this house was involved," Vittorio said. "I think it is a possibility we cannot ignore," Dante said. "Our father sealed that archive himself, according to Nadia, which means either he did it entirely alone or someone convinced him it needed to be done, someone he trusted enough to listen to." "Salvatore trusted very few people that deeply," Nadia said quietly. "In his final years, there were only a handful of names he ever mentioned with that kind of weight. Antonio Reyes was one. There was another, though I never learned much about him. A man Salvatore referred to only as his oldest friend." "Do you have a name?" Alina asked. Nadia shook her head slowly. "No. Salvatore was careful never to say it aloud in front of the staff. I only remember the phrase because he used it so rarely, and always in a tone that suggested both respect and something closer to fear." "We need a name," Vittorio said. "Search every remaining record in this house, every ledger, every letter. If my father trusted someone enough to seal away the truth about what happened to two men, that trust had to be documented somewhere, even if only in passing." Nadia nodded and left to begin the search immediately, taking 2 of the household staff with her to comb through decades of remaining paperwork. Marco excused himself shortly after, promising to reach out to his contacts before nightfall, his 2 men following close behind as he departed. That left Alina alone with Vittorio and Dante in the quiet of the East Hall, the afternoon light slanting long and gold across the table where her father's notebook still lay open. "You should rest," Vittorio said, noticing the exhaustion clearly written across her face. "You have been awake far longer than anyone should be, chasing answers that have waited 20 years already. They will still be waiting after a few hours of sleep." "I do not think I can rest," Alina admitted. "Not with all of this so close." Dante studied her for a long moment, something in his expression softening slightly from the suspicion he had carried since their first meeting. "For what it is worth," he said, "I owe you an apology. I assumed the worst about you, about your father, because it was easier than considering the alternative, that something far darker had been happening in this family long before either of us was old enough to understand it." "Thank you," Alina said, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "That means more than you probably realize." Dante nodded once, then excused himself as well, leaving Alina alone with Vittorio for the first time since the previous night. The silence between them stretched, comfortable in a way she had not expected, given everything that had happened since she first stepped into this house. Your father sounds like he was a good man, Vittorio said eventually, breaking the quiet. Careful, loyal, the kind of person who notices when something is wrong, even when it would be far easier to look away. He was, Alina said softly. I only wish I had known him longer. I wish I had gotten the chance to ask him these questions myself, instead of piecing together his life from old ledgers and hidden boxes. We will find out what happened to him, Vittorio said. I promise you that. You do not have to promise me anything, Alina said. You have already done more than I expected when I first hid in that wall, waiting to be found. I meant what I said, Vittorio replied, his voice quiet but certain. This house has carried enough secrets. It is time some of them were finally set free. Alina studied him for a long moment, searching for the same careful calculation she had seen in his expression the night they first met, the guarded distance of a man who trusted almost no one. She found, instead, something far more open, an honesty that surprised her as much as it comforted her. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing me, for letting me stay long enough to find this much. Do not thank me yet, Vittorio said, echoing Nadia's words from the night before. We have uncovered questions layered inside older questions. The truth, when we finally reach it, may not be simple and it may not be gentle. I have spent my whole life waiting for an answer, Alina said. I would rather face something difficult than continue living inside a silence that has already taken everything from me. Vittorio held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them before he finally looked away, gathering the scattered blueprints back into their box with careful hands. Rest, he said again, gentler this time. Tomorrow we search for Antonio Reyes and for the name of whoever my father called his oldest friend. Whatever answers remain, we will find them together. Alina nodded, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion she had been holding at bay since the moment gunfire first shattered the quiet of this house. As she rose to leave the East Hall, she glanced back once at Vittorio, still standing over the table of old documents, and felt, for the first time since her father disappeared, that she was no longer searching for the truth entirely alone. She made her way toward the guest room she had been given, her thoughts still full of blueprints and faded photographs, when a small sound stopped her near the top of the main staircase. A door, somewhere down the darkened hallway to her left, easing shut with careful quiet, as though whoever had closed it did not want to be heard. Alina paused, listening. The hallway was empty, lit only by the last traces of evening light filtering through a high window. She told herself it was likely a member of the household staff, finishing some late task before the house settled for the night. But something about the stillness that followed unsettled her, a feeling of being watched that prickled along the back of her neck. She continued to her room, glancing back once before closing the door behind her, and told herself she was simply exhausted, her mind conjuring shadows out of nothing after a day spent surrounded by secrets. Yet as she lay down to finally rest, she could not fully shake the sense that somewhere within these walls, someone had been listening far more closely than anyone in that East Hall had realized, and that whatever they had overheard would not stay quiet for long. The alarm came at dawn, sharp and sudden, tearing Alina from sleep before she had even realized she had drifted off. Shouting echoed through the halls outside her door, followed by the heavy sound of running footsteps. She scrambled out of bed just as the door burst open, one of Vittorio's men filling the frame, his face tight with urgency. You need to come with me, now. What is happening? Alina demanded, already pulling on her shoes. The East Hall, the man said. The documents are gone. Alina's stomach dropped as she followed him down the corridor, her heart pounding harder with every step. She reached the East Hall to find Vittorio standing over the table, his expression carved from stone, the space where the box of blueprints and her father's notebook had been left the night before now empty except for a few scattered papers, deliberately left behind as though to mock them. Someone took it, Elena said, her voice hollow with disbelief. All of it, my father's notebook. Someone with access to this house, Vittorio said grimly. Someone who knew exactly where to look and exactly what to take. Dante arrived moments later, breathing hard from having run the length of the house. The guards posted outside this hall last night say nothing happened. No alarms triggered, no forced entry. Which means whoever did this did not need to force their way in, Vittorio said. They already belonged here. The weight of that realization settled heavily over the room. Elena thought immediately of the sound she had heard the night before, the door easing shut somewhere down the darkened hallway, and the prickling sense of being watched that she had dismissed as exhaustion. I heard something last night, she said suddenly. A door closing near the top of the main staircase after I left this room. I thought it was nothing. Vittorio's eyes sharpened. Show me exactly where. They moved quickly through the house, Elena leading them to the darkened hallway where she had paused the night before. It ended in a narrow servants' corridor, rarely used, connecting to a stairwell that led down toward the kitchens, and beyond that, a side entrance rarely watched by the main guard rotation. Someone could have slipped out this way without ever crossing paths with the guards at the front or the gate, Dante said, examining the side door, which stood slightly ajar despite standing locked the night before. Nadia arrived out of breath, having heard the commotion from her own room. Her face went pale when she learned what had happened. The blueprints, the notebook, all of it gone. All of it, Vittorio confirmed. Along with any hope we had of using it as proof, should we need to convince anyone outside this house of what we found. We still have the photograph, Elena said suddenly, patting the pocket of her jacket, relief flooding through her as her fingers closed around the small folded image. I kept it separate last night. It is still here. That is something, at least, Nadia said. But whoever took the rest clearly wanted to erase the proof of what your father witnessed, which tells us they are still very much alive and very much afraid of what we might do with the truth. A phone rang somewhere down the hall, and one of Vittorio's men hurried in moments later, his expression grave. It is Bellini, he said. He says it is urgent. Vittorio took the call, his jaw tightening further with every word Marco spoke on the other end. When he finally hung up, his expression had shifted from anger into something colder, more focused. Marco says his contact confirmed Antonio Reyes is alive, Vittorio said, living quietly under a different name, several hours from here. But he also says someone reached his contact first, hours before Marco's call this morning, asking the exact same questions. Someone is ahead of us, Dante said. Someone inside this house, most likely, Vittorio said, who overheard our plans last night and moved immediately to protect whatever truth Reyes still holds. Elena felt a cold certainty settle over her. The oldest friend Nadia mentioned. Whoever your father trusted enough to help seal away the archive all those years ago. They are still here, still protecting the same secret. We need that name, Vittorio said. Nadia, keep searching the remaining records. Dante questioned the household staff quietly, starting with anyone who has served this family long enough to have known my father in his final years. And me, Elena asked. Vittorio's expression softened only slightly. You come with me. We go to raise ourselves before whoever is working against us reaches him first. They left within the hour, a small convoy moving quickly along the coastal roads, Marco meeting them partway with his own vehicle trailing close behind. The tension inside the car was thick, every mile bringing them closer to a confrontation none of them could fully predict. The address led to a modest house set back from the road, surrounded by overgrown gardens that suggested its occupant preferred to remain unseen. Vittorio approached the door first, Elena close behind him, while Dante and Marco's men spread out to watch the surrounding property. The door opened before Vittorio even knocked, revealing an old man with tired eyes and deep lines carved into his face by decades of careful, watchful living. He studied the group in front of him for a long moment before his gaze settled on Alina, and something in his expression shifted, recognition dawning slowly. "You have his eyes," the old man said quietly. "Marcus Whitfield's eyes." Alina's breath caught. "You knew my father." "I knew him," Antonio Reyes said, stepping back to allow them inside. "And I have spent 20 years waiting for someone to finally come asking the right questions." They gathered in a small, sparsely furnished living room, and Reyes lowered himself slowly into a worn armchair, his hands trembling slightly as he began to speak. "Your father found records in that archive that were never meant to survive," he said. "Proof of arrangements made between Salvatore Conti and men far more dangerous than either the Contis or the Bellinis, involving territory and money that neither family actually controlled." "What kind of arrangements?" Vittorio asked. "A silent partnership," Reyes said, "with a third family, one that has stayed hidden from public knowledge for generations, operating through intermediaries like myself, so that neither the Contis nor the Bellinis would ever realize how deeply their business had become entangled with people neither family had actually chosen to work with." "Who is this third family?" Marco demanded. Reyes hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the window as though he expected danger to be listening even here, in this quiet, hidden house. "The Varga family," he said finally, his voice dropping lower. "They have operated in the shadows of both your families for longer than either of you have been alive, taking a share of profits neither Salvatore nor your father, Marco, ever fully understood they were paying." Alina felt the story taking a shape far larger and more dangerous than she had imagined, and my father found proof of this. "He did," Reyes confirmed, "and he made the mistake of believing Salvatore would want to know, would want to end the arrangement once he understood how deeply he had been deceived. Your father came to warn him, and I came separately, through my own channels, believing the same thing." "What happened?" Alina pressed, her heart pounding. "Someone close to Salvatore learned what we had discovered before either of us could speak to him directly," Reyes said, his voice growing unsteady. "Someone he trusted completely, who had likely been working with the Vargas for years already, protecting the arrangement from exposure. That person made sure your father and I never got the chance to finish what we started." "They killed him," Alina whispered, the words she had feared for 20 years finally spoken aloud. Reyes did not answer immediately, his silence heavier than any confirmation could have been. "I do not know for certain what happened to your father after that night," he said finally. "I was warned to disappear, told that if I valued my life, I would vanish completely and never speak of what I had found. I took that warning seriously. I have lived in hiding ever since, believing your father had likely done the same or worse." Alina's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall, 20 years of unanswered questions collapsing into a truth far darker than she had ever allowed herself to imagine. "Who warned you?" Vittorio asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Who was this person Salvatore trusted?" Reyes met his gaze steadily, and for the first time since they had arrived, something like fear flickered openly across his weathered face. "A name I have not spoken aloud in 20 years, he said, "because speaking it, even now, feels like inviting the same danger back into my life." "You are safe here," Marco said. "We will not let anything happen to you." Reyes studied each of them in turn, weighing whether he could trust the promise, before finally leaning forward, his voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "His name is Elias Varga," he said. "And unless I am very much mistaken, he is still very much alive, still very much in control, and very likely already aware that all of you are sitting in this room right now." The words had barely left his mouth when the sound of shattering glass erupted from the back of the house, followed immediately by shouting outside. Vittorio was on his feet instantly, pulling Alina behind him as Dante burst through the front door, his weapon already drawn. "Vehicles," Dante said sharply, "coming up the road fast. We need to move now." Reyes rose unsteadily, fear replacing the careful composure he had maintained throughout his story. "They found me," he said. "After 20 years, they finally found me." Vittorio moved quickly, gesturing for everyone to head toward the rear of the house, away from the approaching vehicles. Alina grabbed Reyes by the arm, helping him move faster than his aging body wanted to allow, her mind racing through everything he had just revealed even as the immediate danger closed in around them. They slipped out through a back door into the overgrown garden, moving low and fast toward a break in the fence that Marco's men had already located, the sound of vehicles skidding to a stop at the front of the house echoing behind them. Alina's heart hammered against her ribs as they ran, the weight of Elias Varga's name settling over her like a shadow that had waited 20 years to finally fall. They reached the tree line at the edge of the property just as shouting erupted behind them, several men fanning out through the garden they had fled moments before. Marco's driver had already brought their vehicle around to a narrow access road hidden from the main street, and Dante practically threw Reyes into the back seat before climbing in after him. "Where is Alina?" Vittorio demanded, spinning around to find her a few steps behind, half hidden by a low-hanging branch, watching the men searching the garden with wide, frightened eyes. "I am here," she said, forcing her legs to move despite the fear locking them in place. Vittorio closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, pulling her forward just as one of the searching men turned in their direction, his shout cutting sharply through the morning air. "There by the fence." Gunfire cracked through the quiet countryside, and Vittorio pulled Alina down behind the vehicle, shielding her with his own body as Dante returned fire from the open door, giving Marco's driver the cover he needed to start the engine. Alina's ears rang from the sudden violence of it all, her mind struggling to process how quickly the quiet conversation in Reyes's living room had transformed into a fight for their lives. "Get in," Vittorio ordered, practically lifting her into the vehicle before diving in beside her. The door had barely closed before the driver accelerated hard down the narrow access road, gravel spraying behind them as they left the pursuing men scrambling toward their own vehicles. They drove in tense silence for several minutes, checking behind them repeatedly for any sign of pursuit, before Marco finally spoke from the front seat, his voice tight with adrenaline. "We lost them at the turn onto the main road. For now." "For now," Vittorio repeated grimly, "which means they know exactly who we spoke to and exactly what he told us." Reyes sat hunched beside Dante, his hands still trembling from the encounter, his earlier composure completely shattered. 20 years, he murmured, almost to himself. 20 years of careful hiding, and it took less than an hour with all of you to bring them straight to my door. "We will keep you safe," Alina said, though her voice shook with the aftermath of fear she was still working to control. "You have already given us more truth than we had in 20 years. We are not going to let anything happen to you now." Reyes looked at her, something softening in his tired eyes despite the danger they had just escaped. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly, "of how hard you have fought to find him, even after all this time." The words settled over Alina with a bittersweet weight, gratitude tangled together with the fresh grief of finally understanding, even partially, what had truly happened to her father all those years ago. They drove for nearly an hour before Vittorio finally directed the driver toward a secondary property, a smaller house owned by the Conti family under a name unconnected to their more public holdings, a place meant for exactly this kind of emergency. Once inside, with the doors secured and guards posted at every entrance, the group finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe. "Elias Varga," Vittorio said, pacing slowly across the small living room while the others settled uneasily onto worn furniture. A name my father never once mentioned in my presence in my entire life. Which tells you exactly how carefully this was hidden, Marco said. Whoever the Vargas are, they have spent decades making certain neither of our families ever learned their name, let alone understood how deeply we were entangled with them. There is something else, Ray said quietly, drawing every eye in the room toward him. Something I did not say back at the house, because I was not certain it was safe to speak it aloud even there. Tell us now, Vittorio said. Reyes hesitated, glancing toward Alina with an expression that made her stomach tighten with dread. Elias Varga did not act alone, all those years ago. He had help from inside the Conti household itself, someone close enough to Salvatore to know his every movement, his every meeting. I never learned that person's identity, but I remember Salvatore mentioning, in passing, that his oldest friend had begun asking unusual questions in the weeks before your father, and I disappeared from his life. The phrase hit the room like a physical blow. Nadia's earlier words echoed sharply in Alina's memory. His oldest friend. That is the same person Nadia mentioned, Alina said. Whoever helped seal the archive. The same person who may have stolen the documents from the East Hall last night. Someone still inside your household, Marco said grimly, looking at Vittorio. Someone who has been protecting this secret for over 20 years, right under your family's own roof. Dante's expression darkened considerably. If that is true, then whoever it is knows everything we have discovered. They know about Reyes. They likely know we are here right now. Vittorio's jaw tightened as the full weight of the danger settled over him. Then we need that name before anyone else gets hurt. Nadia is still searching the household records. I need to contact her immediately. He stepped away to make the call, his voice low and urgent as he relayed everything they had learned, instructing Nadia to search with even greater care, to trust no one within the household until they understood exactly who they were dealing with. When he returned, his expression had shifted into something harder, more determined than Alina had seen from him yet. Nadia says she has narrowed the search to a small handful of names, he said. Men and women who served my father closely enough for long enough to fit what Reyes has described. She believes she can have an answer by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow may be too late, Dante said. If Vargas people already know we found Reyes, they will move quickly to protect whoever remains hidden inside our own household. Then we move faster than they expect, Vittorio said. Tonight, we return to the estate quietly, and we let Nadia finish narrowing that list while the rest of us prepare for whatever comes next. Alina listened to the plan taking shape around her, exhaustion and fear warring with a fierce, unshakable determination that had carried her this far already. 20 years of silence had finally begun to break open, revealing a truth far larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined, tangled together, with a betrayal that had been hiding inside the Conti household for decades. Whoever this hidden ally of Elias Varga turned out to be, Alina understood now that finding them was no longer simply about answering the question of what happened to her father. It had become a matter of survival for everyone gathered in this small, guarded house, all of them now standing directly in the path of a danger that had already proven, 20 years ago, exactly how far it was willing to go to protect its secrets. The estate looked unchanged when they returned after dark, its familiar stone walls rising quiet and steady against the night sky, giving no hint of the danger Alina now understood was hiding somewhere inside it. Guards moved through their usual rotations, lights glowed warmly from the windows, and yet Alina felt every nerve in her body pulled tight as they passed through the gates, aware that somewhere behind that peaceful facade, a traitor had been waiting patiently for over 20 years. Nadia met them in the entrance hall, her face pale and drawn from hours of searching, a slim folder clutched tightly against her chest. "I have narrowed it down," she said quietly, glancing around as though the walls themselves might be listening. "3 names. All three served Salvator closely enough, long enough, to fit what Reyes described. "Say them," Vittorio said. Nadia hesitated only a moment before speaking. Carlo Renzi, who managed the estate's finances for nearly 30 years until his retirement 5 years ago. Helena Vance, who served as Salvator's personal assistant during the years in question and who still works within this household today. And Felix Grady, though we already know his story does not fit as neatly as the others. "Grady is accounted for," Marco said. "He was Reyes' contact, not Salvator's ally. That leaves Renzi and Vance." "Helena Vance," Alina repeated slowly, the name settling strangely in her memory. "I believe I have seen her since arriving here. An older woman, always near the kitchens." "She manages household staff now," Nadia confirmed. "She has remained close to this family for her entire working life." Vittorio's expression darkened. Close enough to know everything Salvator knew, close enough to have been trusted completely. "We need to speak with her," Dante said. "Tonight, before she has any reason to suspect what we have learned." But even as he spoke, one of the household guards hurried into the hall, his expression tense. "Sir, Helena Vance requested access to the vehicle garage 20 minutes ago, said she needed to retrieve something for tomorrow's deliveries. She has not returned." Vittorio's jaw tightened. "Show me." They moved quickly through the house, reaching the garage to find it empty, one of the smaller vehicles missing entirely, its space in the row left conspicuously vacant. A folded note sat on the workbench near the door, addressed simply to Vittorio in careful, deliberate handwriting. He unfolded it, reading quickly, his expression shifting from anger into something colder and more focused. He passed it to Alina without a word, and she read the brief message with a growing sense of dread. "You have finally asked the right questions after all these years. I always knew this day would come. If you want the whole truth, come to the old chapel at the edge of the eastern property, alone, before midnight. Bring the girl, if she wants to finally understand everything her father died trying to protect." "She is expecting us," Alina said quietly. "She knows exactly what we have found." "It could be a trap," Dante warned. "She has had 20 years to prepare for this moment. She may not intend to give you answers at all." "I have to go," Alina said firmly. "Whatever risk this carries, I have spent my whole life waiting for this chance. I am not turning away from it now." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the danger against the understanding that nothing he said would change her mind. "Then we go together," he said finally, "but carefully. Dante, position men around the chapel grounds out of sight, ready to move if anything goes wrong." The old chapel sat at the far edge of the eastern property, half swallowed by overgrown ivy, its stone walls weathered by decades of neglect. A single lantern glowed faintly through one of the narrow windows as Alina and Vittorio approached, their footsteps quiet on the damp grass, the rest of their group spread carefully through the surrounding trees. Inside, Helena Vance waited alone, seated on one of the old wooden pews, her posture straight despite the exhaustion etched clearly into her features. She looked up as they entered, and something in her expression, relief tangled together with sorrow, told Alina immediately that whatever came next would finally be the truth. "You look like him," Helena said softly, studying Alina's face in the lantern light. "I noticed it the first time I saw you in this house, though I said nothing." "Then you knew who I was from the beginning," Alina said. "I knew," Helena confirmed. "I have known since the raid, when word spread through the household that a woman named Whitfield had been found hiding in Salvator's old study. I have spent every day since deciding whether to run, or whether to finally stop running." "Tell us what happened to my father," Alina said, her voice steady despite the emotion rising inside her. "All of it, no more half-truths." Helena drew a slow breath, her hands folding tightly in her lap. "Elias Varga approached me nearly 25 years ago," she began, long before your father ever discovered what was hidden in that archive. He offered protection for my family, financial security beyond anything my modest position here could provide in exchange for information. Small things at first, meeting schedules, household movements, nothing that seemed to matter. Until it did, Vittorio said quietly. Until it did, Helena agreed, her voice heavy with regret. When your father found those documents, Elena, and came to warn Salvatore, I was the one who learned of it first. Salvatore trusted me completely, told me everything, believing I would help him decide how to handle such a dangerous discovery. Instead, I contacted Varga immediately, terrified of what would happen to my own family if the arrangement I had helped maintain for years suddenly collapsed. Elena's chest tightened painfully. You told them my father knew. I did, Helena admitted, tears finally slipping down her weathered face. I did not know, I swear to you, what they intended to do about it. I believed, foolishly, that they would simply find a way to quiet the situation, to protect the arrangement without real harm coming to anyone. But that is not what happened, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Helena shook her head slowly. Your father was taken the same night Felix Grady vanished. I was told only that they would be relocated somewhere far away, given new lives, new identities, in exchange for their permanent silence. I wanted desperately to believe that was the truth. And now, Vittorio asked, after 20 years, do you still believe that? Helena's silence stretched long and painful before she finally answered. No, she said quietly. I do not believe that anymore. I have not believed it for a very long time. I think Varga's men made certain that night that neither Marcus Whitfield nor Felix Grady would ever be found by anyone ever again. The words landed with a devastating finality that Elena had somehow known was coming, even as some small, stubborn part of her had held on to hope until this exact moment. 20 years of searching, of waiting, of quiet, desperate hope, finally collapsing into the confirmation she had feared her entire life. Why help seal the archive? Vittorio asked. Why work with my father to hide the very evidence that could have exposed what happened? Because Salvatore was as afraid as I was, Helena said. He learned, eventually, exactly how deeply his family's business had become entangled with the Vargas, and he understood that exposing the truth would destroy everything he had built, and likely cost him his own life in the process. He chose silence, and I chose to help him maintain it, because by then I was already too deeply complicit to do anything else. You helped them cover up my father's murder, Elena said, the word finally spoken aloud after 20 years of avoiding it, feeling both devastating and strangely freeing all at once. I did, Helena said, meeting her gaze steadily despite the shame written across every line of her face. And I have lived every single day since carrying that weight. When I heard you had returned to this house, asking the questions I always knew someone eventually would, I understood my time was finally over. I could not run from it any longer, and honestly, Elena, I did not want to. Why the chapel? Vittorio asked. Why bring us here instead of simply telling us at the estate? Because Vargas still has people watching this family, Helena said. Even now, even after all these years, I did not want the truth spoken inside walls where those people might overhear it. Whatever happens to me now, I wanted Elena to finally hear the whole story without anyone else deciding to silence it a second time. As if her words had summoned the very danger she feared, the chapel doors burst open behind them, and 3 armed men stepped inside, weapons already raised. Elena's heart lurched with terror as Vittorio pulled her behind him instinctively, but before the intruders could close the distance, Dante and Marco's men emerged from the shadows outside, quickly surrounding the chapel and forcing a tense standoff in the flickering lantern light. Lower your weapons, Vittorio commanded, his voice carrying an authority that filled the small stone room. You are already surrounded. This ends now, one way or another. The lead intruder hesitated, clearly weighing his options against the clearly superior numbers now pressing in from every side. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his weapon, followed by the two men beside him, and Dante moved forward immediately to secure them under guard. "Elias Varga sent you," Vittorio said, stepping closer to the lead intruder. "Tell him something for me. Tell him the silence his family has relied on for 20 years is finished. Whatever protection he believed he still had inside this house, inside my family, is gone." The man said nothing, his expression carefully blank despite the fear flickering behind his eyes, and Dante led the three of them away under heavy guard, leaving Elena, Vittorio, and Helena alone once more in the quiet chapel. Helena rose slowly from the pew, her expression resigned but strangely peaceful, as though a weight she had carried for 20 years had finally, painfully, begun to lift. "I will answer for what I have done," she said quietly. "To you, Elena, and to whatever authority you believe is right. I only ask that you use what I have told you to finally end whatever remains of Elias Varga's reach into this family." "You will answer for it," Vittorio said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But tonight you have given Elena something she has waited 20 years to receive. That matters, even alongside everything else." Elena stepped forward, studying the older woman's face, searching for anger inside herself and finding, instead, something closer to a complicated, exhausted grief. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finally telling me the truth, even though it came far later than it should have." Helena nodded, tears falling freely now, and allowed herself to be led away by two of Vittorio's men, toward whatever reckoning awaited her for the choices she had made decades ago. Elena stood alone with Vittorio in the quiet chapel, the lantern flickering low. The weight of 20 years finally settled into something she could hold, examine, and eventually, perhaps, begin to release. "It is over," she said softly, though the words felt strange in her mouth after so long spent chasing them. "This part is over," Vittorio said gently. "Elias Varga still exists, still holds influence somewhere beyond these walls. But you have your answer, Elena. You know now what happened to your father and why. That is more than you had when you first hid inside that wall, waiting to be found." "I did not expect to find any of this," Elena admitted. "Not the truth, not this family, not you." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, something warm finally breaking through the careful composure he had maintained since the night they first met. "Neither did I," he said quietly. "But I am glad, whatever else this night has cost, that you did." They walked together out of the old chapel and into the cool night air, the estate glowing softly in the distance, no longer a place of hidden dangers and unanswered questions, but the beginning, however uncertain, of something Elena had never allowed herself to hope for. The days that followed moved quickly, filled with careful decisions and difficult conversations. Vittorio contacted trusted allies outside the reach of either family's rivalries, quietly building a case against Elias Varga using the confession Helena had given, along with the surviving fragments of Marcus Whitfield's journal that Reyes still remembered clearly enough to help reconstruct. It would not undo 20 years of silence, but it was enough, Vittorio assured her, to finally begin unraveling the protection Varga had relied on for so long. Marco returned to his own family's estate with a promise that the fragile peace formed between their two houses would not end with the answers they had found together. "We spent decades believing your family was the enemy," he told Vittorio before leaving, "when the true danger was always hiding somewhere neither of us thought to look. That mistake cost both our families more than either of us fully understand yet. Let us not repeat it." Nadia remained close to Elena in the days that followed, the two of them spending quiet afternoons together, sorting through what remained of the household records, piecing together a fuller picture of Marcus Whitfield's final months, small details that painted him not as a mystery or a wound, but as the thoughtful, careful man Elena had always believed him to be. "He would be proud of you," Nadia told her one afternoon, as they organized the last of the old ledgers. Not many people would have walked into a house like this, not knowing what waited inside, simply to finally understand where they came from. I almost did not come, Elena admitted. I sat outside the gate for nearly an hour before I found the courage to walk through it. And yet you did, Nadia said, smiling gently. That courage is exactly what carried you through everything that followed. Dante, too, had changed in ways Elena had not expected. The hard suspicion that had defined their first meetings gave way slowly to something closer to quiet respect. He sought her out one evening in the garden, standing somewhat awkwardly beside the same bookshelf that had once hidden her from gunfire, now simply an ordinary piece of furniture in an ordinary, peaceful house. I judged you unfairly, he said, without preamble. I am not always quick to admit that, but I think you have earned hearing it plainly. You were protecting your family, Elena said. I understand that better now than I did that first night. Still, Dante said, you deserved better than the suspicion I gave you. For what it is worth, I am glad my brother trusted you when I could not yet manage it myself. Elena found herself smiling at that, a genuine warmth settling over the strange, unexpected family she had stumbled into during the most frightening night of her life. It was Vittorio, though, who occupied most of her thoughts as the days passed. Their conversations grew longer, quieter, filled with the kind of careful honesty that had been entirely absent from her life before she walked through the gates of the Conti estate. He showed her, eventually, the rest of the hidden passages her father had designed throughout the house, walking her through corridors and concealed rooms with a patience that revealed far more warmth than the guarded man who had first pulled her from behind that bookshelf. Your father built something remarkable here, Vittorio told her one evening, as they stood together in the study where everything had first begun. Not just hidden rooms. He built a kind of quiet protection into the bones of this house, long before anyone understood how much it would eventually be needed. I like to think he knew, somehow, that his work would matter someday, Elena said, even if he never got the chance to see how. Perhaps he did know, Vittorio said softly. Perhaps that is exactly why he left the drawing behind for you to find, trusting that one day you would be the one to finish what he started. Elena looked at him in the fading evening light, feeling, for the first time since her father's disappearance had first hollowed out a place inside her, something that felt remarkably close to whole. The house around them, once a place of fear and gunfire and hidden secrets, had slowly become something else entirely, a place where the truth had finally been allowed to breathe, and where she, unexpectedly, had found not just answers, but a sense of belonging she had never dared to hope for.